Welcome to the Strong, Single and Human podcast, a real look at single parenting, the ups and downs, and how to navigate life with kids on your own while keeping sane. Covering subjects such as domestic violence through to fussy eaters and solo dating. I'm your host, Claire Martin. Welcome. At the beginning of February this year, we had an awesome gentleman on to talk about The Addicted Child and the book he'd written on the subject to help parents recognize the signs and then understand what the next steps were should their child be addicted to substances or any other things like shopping, etc. Since then, Richard Capriola has been investigating how the pandemic has impacted teen substance abuse and teen mental health. And today, Richard has come along to the podcast to tell us what he has found out. Welcome, Richard. Thanks for coming back. How are you?
I'm doing great, Claire. Thank you so much for inviting me back. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, I think it's fascinating that you've been investigating the pandemic and I'd love to know what the results are and what you've found out. So just in case people missed you on the last podcast, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you actually do?
Yeah, for years, I was in education administration. I then transitioned over to working in the mental health substance abuse field, worked as a mental health and substance abuse counselor for over a decade at Menninger Clinic, which is a large psychiatric hospital in Houston, Texas, and worked with both teenagers and adults. After I left Menninger, because I'd worked with so many families and seen the struggle that they'd gone through with their children who were exposed to and using substances, I wrote a book for parents, and it's called The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse, because I wanted parents to feel more confident, less paranoid, better prepared to deal with this issue, to know the warning signs. Really, that's the important thing, to know the warning signs on what to look for so that they can intervene early and, if needed, get their child treatment and get beyond this. So I put this book together, The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. I kept it short because parents are busy. They don't have time to read volumes of information on this. So I kept it to around 100 pages. So I think hopefully it's a quick resource for parents that will give them the warning signs and the assessments that they need to know about and help them feel just better confident about this topic. And all of that's available at the book's website, which is www.helptheaddictedchild.com.
Yeah, and look, if anyone wants to hear Richard talk about it in more detail, we interviewed you way back in February, the February edition of the podcast, so they can go back and listen to you talk all about your book and how you came to actually write it, and then the content of it and how you help adults, what am I talking about? How you help parents of addicted children. So, that's great. So, thank you for that. Thank you. So the pandemic, tell us about your research and what you've been doing.
Well, the research that has come out fairly recently looked at how the pandemic affected teenage substance abuse. This is a survey that's done every year. It's a national survey that looks at how teenagers are using substances like alcohol and drugs and the extent that they're using it. And this year, the report showed that during the pandemic, there was a rather dramatic decrease in adolescent substance abuse. It's sort of a double-edged sword, because we saw adolescent substance abuse go down, but we saw mental health issues go up. So while kids might have been using substances less, they were struggling more with their mental health issues. But in terms of the substances across the board, pretty much, we saw a significant decline in 2021 due to the pandemic. And that includes substances like alcohol and marijuana and nicotine vaping. For example, the percentage of high school seniors that were using alcohol, drinking alcohol, dropped from 55% down to 47%. The number of 10th graders that were drinking alcohol dropped from 41 all the way down to 29%. And we saw similar changes, declines. We saw declines in marijuana use. We saw declines in nicotine vaping and marijuana vaping, which until the pandemic, this vaping issue had really started to dramatically increase. Vaping is where they will take a substance like nicotine or marijuana, put it into an instrument, turns it into a vapor, and then they inhale it. Well, until the pandemic, for about 3 years prior to the pandemic, we'd been seeing dramatic increases in high school students vaping nicotine and vaping marijuana. But the pandemic, like it did with the rest of the substances, sort of drove that down. Now, even though the pandemic caused a decline in teenage substance abuse, the numbers are still high. For example, 1 in 3 high school seniors still report using some type of an illicit drug, mostly marijuana. And so it's still an issue that's out there. But the pandemic did cause a decline in substance use. We'll know in about another year whether or not, now that we've moved away from the pandemic and kids are back into the regular classroom, back into their social activities, in a year from now, we'll have data which shows if that decline has now stabilized, or a year into the after pandemic, during this academic year, do we see an increase in substance abuse now that we're moving away from the pandemic? And we'll know that in about a year from now.
Wow. So do we actually understand why there was a decrease? Is it because the kids were at home and they couldn't get it quite so readily? Is it because, they aren't around their friends as such, therefore the peer pressure isn't there? Have they investigated why?
I think you just mentioned probably 2 of the most important reasons. Kids were pulled away from their school environment. They were pulled away from their social activities, their friends. They were isolated at home. There was a significantly less peer interaction among kids. So I think that all accounts for why we saw the decline. And like I was saying, now that they're back into their social environments, back into their traditional classroom settings, in a year from now, we'll see if that caused an increase in substance use among teenagers, or did the decline stabilize?
Wow, yeah, no. Was there any difference between boys and girls? Did they see any difference there at all?
No, I don't think they did. There is a difference between substance abuse between boys and girls, but that's always been the case. But in terms of the decline, no, because boys and girls both were restricted, so to speak. They both were pulled away from their normal social interactions and from their friends. So I think the research was pretty well consistent that there was a decline across the board because of the pandemic.
So, which is a good thing. Any substance abuse declines are a good thing. I suppose it's just understanding why and seeing if any of those whys can then be converted into wins when we're in an endemic, not a pandemic as such. So, but we didn't find that younger children so there was no difference in ages at all, that we weren't. I mean, I can imagine that children, adolescents and teens, their substance abuse reduced and their parents increased, because there was sort of like the having the children at home 24/7 potentially could increase anyone's substance abuse of alcohol or anything else. And I think I've had a gentleman on, Paul Dillon, who from Sydney, who basically does research on alcohol and substance abuse as well. And he was discussing and talking about the pandemic and its effect, and I know its effect on adults. That it just increased everything. I don't know. Was that what was discovered in the research that you did?
Well, the research that I saw was primarily focusing on teenagers, on adolescents. But I have seen some reports about how the pandemic did cause an increase in, say, alcohol consumption among women. They were under, parents were under a lot of stress too because of the pandemic. Their kids were at home all the time, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Some of them, their work situations were dramatically changed. So a lot of stress for adults as well. And I could see where, some of the data might be pointing towards an increase in substance use among adults, particularly alcohol.
So that's good then. Regarding the mental health side of things, what was found? I mean, I know we said it increased, but in what ways did it increase? What were they finding?
Well, prior to the pandemic, we'd already seen an alarming increase in the mental health of youth. We had begun to see for 2009 to 2019, we had already witnessed a large increase in the number of high school students that were reporting symptoms of feeling sad and hopelessness. We'd seen an increase in teenagers reporting suicidal thoughts. And then during the pandemic, because of all the challenges that we discussed earlier, we began to see increases in adolescent depression and anxiety. It almost doubled. Anxiety and depression almost doubled among teenagers. And the number of teenagers showing up at hospital emergency rooms for suspected suicide also dramatically increased, particularly among girls. Somewhat for boys, but particularly among girls. And students were reporting symptoms of feeling anxious and angry and annoyed. They felt bored and sad and lonely, and many were experiencing sleep problems throughout the pandemic. So this mental health crisis that we'd already been seeing prior to the pandemic, the pandemic just intensified it.
Do we know from the research what they were anxious and angry about? As such, were they angry at the government? Were they angry at the pandemic in general? Were they angry? I mean, I know and it's a long time ago. I mean, it's like somewhat 40 odd years ago for myself. But like, being a teenager, you are very much angry. You're angry at society. You're angry at rules and regulations that are set down. I mean, I remember being a teenager and being angry that it was expected that I had to give my seat up on the bus. These silly trivial things, but I was expected to give my seat up on the bus to somebody who was older than me, who was perfectly fit and well and could stand up. And I was all fine for, the elderly. So, anyone who, was old and wasn't capable of standing up. But to give my seat up to somebody who was like, 40 to 50 when they were actually capable of standing up. Do you know what I mean? Like all fine for giving it up for a pregnant woman or whatever. I was all fine with that. But I just was like very much annoyed and angry that there was this rule that I had to give my seat up to an elder, right? Which I wouldn't even think twice about now. But like being a teenager, you're just angry at these things, right? And And I know it's just insane. But like, do we know from the research what teenagers are
I,
angry and anxious about?
I haven't seen the research on that, but I suspect that anger, came as a result of feeling restricted and tied down, being pulled away from their friends, being limited pretty much to social interactions over the internet, social media, not being able to leave the house, so to speak, being almost a feeling of imprisoned in their homes, all of those, feeling restricted, and anytime we feel tied down and restricted, so we can get angry about that. And I think that plays a big role in terms of some of the feelings that these kids were having. And remember, this just wasn't for a day or two or a week. They were pretty well restricted and pulled away from their normal activities for months after months after months, and that can wear them down as well, and bring out some feelings of frustration and anxiety and anger.
Yeah. And I've got to admit, I mean, I've got a 6-year-old, and he actually became and felt a lot
Yeah.
safer at home. It seemed as though he didn't want to go out, and his little world got smaller, and he was quite happy staying at home, watching movies, doing school from home. He didn't really want to go to home. So his world shrunk as such, which concerned me because, and I don't know if you've seen any research on younger children below, 13 and younger as such, and whether that has affected them, because he's quite comfortable being at home now, and so it's
Yeah.
hard to get him to go out. And I know, speaking to a lot of the other parents at school, they're finding the same thing with their children of a similar age.
Yeah, I think that there is differences between children who are preteen, very, very young, and how they dealt with being confined at home. Then we find with the older teenagers, the 15, 16, 17-year-olds, who are more receptive to social interaction, who really are moving away from their parents and trying to gain their own independence. And they've developed a network of social activities and social interactions. I think the more social a child is, perhaps the more difficult this isolation was for them.
Yeah.
For some kids, they actually thrived in that environment. They thrived in being at home. I was talking to a school principal earlier today, and she was making the comment that some kids really did very, very well at home doing online classes, and other kids not so well. So I think it just shows that every child's different.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. So if we were to have another pandemic, God forbid, but if we were to have another pandemic hit, like what can we do as parents to actually ease, what lessons have been learned from this pandemic that can actually make our lives a bit
Yeah.
easier? And hey, I'm talking to you from the most locked down city in the world, okay? We spent like nigh on nearly 270 odd days locked down with curfews and restricting on how far we can even leave our houses, and thankfully those restrictions have now been lifted, and we don't need to wear masks outside, which I'm still a bit dubious about. So God forbid we should actually get hit by another pandemic, but is there anything that we can do to help our children deal with these situations that we find ourselves in, within the pandemic as such?
Well, I think that there are things that families can do to help their children with their mental health, regardless of whether we're in the middle of a pandemic or not. Because, as I was saying earlier, there was a mental health crisis before the pandemic.
Well, that's right.
So I think that there are some things that parents can do to strengthen, reinforce, so to speak, their child's mental health. One of them is to be a good role model. and take care of ourselves, take care of our own mental health and our own physical health, and let children see that we are doing that and how we're doing it. Another thing is to help our children develop strong, safe, and reliable, stable relationships. The research shows that the most important thing a child needs is a stable, committed relationship with a supportive adult. So help our children develop that strong, safe, and stable relationship.
Yes, also, sorry, Richard, to interrupt you, and also when going back to what you just said about a strong, stable adult, and this is the plus point for being a single parent, it doesn't have to be two strong, stable adults. It only has to be one stable adult within their lives. As long as they have one stable adult within their lives, children have seemed to be able to get through the trauma of divorce, separations, all of the other things that actually occur, as long as they have that one stable rock in their life as such.
Absolutely. That's a great point. It is that one stable relationship that's so important. Now, if they have more, that's great, but one, at least one, is very important. And then encourage our children to build healthy social relationships with peers and teach them what a healthy social relationship was or is. And then be attentive to how our children are spending their time online. On my book's website, there is a blog. And I would encourage parents to go to that website, www.helptheaddictedchild.com. And there is a blog article which has 10 questions. 10 questions we can ask our children to get a reading on their mental health, so to speak. Okay. And these are really simple questions. For example, you could ask a child, what 3 words best describe how you're feeling right now? Just 3 words, how you're feeling right now. Another one is, if your feelings were weather, what kind of a day would it be outside? So there's 10 of these.
That's quite a good question to ask a younger child as well, isn't it? Because they know what the weather's like.
Yeah, and they can very quickly give you a response to that. So these 10 questions, and you don't have to ask all 10. Pick out 1 or 2 that you really like the weather one for a very young child. Or if your child's a little older, pick out one of the other ones. And then just use those questions as a way to check in periodically on your child's mental health. So I would encourage parents to go to the website, helptheaddictedchild.com, read the article, jot down 1, 2, 3 of the questions that you think your child would find interesting and ones that they're likely to respond to, and use that sort of as a check-in to see how are they doing right now? How are they doing today? Things like the weather for a very young kid, that can be fun, that can be entertaining, but it can also give you a checkpoint on how they're doing. Are they having a really sunny day? Are they having a cloudy day? And then you can use that as the starting point maybe of a discussion. If your child says, well, my day feels like, it's pouring down raining, then you can say, well, help me understand why you feel that way. It's just a way of being able to check in on our kids' mental health and see how things are going.
Yeah, and it's important for us as parents to stay calm regarding the answers that they give us. It's not about us panicking or getting angry or really sort of I'm trying to think of the right word, sort of going, well, what, being really accusationalist. I don't even know if that's a word. Am I right? It's like because if you react in a negative way and you're not calm, then they pick up on that and they will then go, oh, I'm not going to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's a great point, because they're going to take their reaction. They're going to take it from you. And if you give a reaction that they don't like, they're more likely to shut down rather than open up. So what you want to do is you want your reaction to be from an inquiring point of view. In other words, well, you say that you feel like you feel inside like it's raining outside. Can you help me understand why you feel that way? Or what is it that you think is responsible for that? So you're actually trying to help the child understand that you're curious about how they're feeling the way they're feeling, and you're asking that child to participate with you in understanding it. So you want to approach it from not from panic, but basically an inquiring point of view. I hear you say that you feel this way. Can you help me understand why you might be feeling that way? And then the other thing is, kids need to know that oftentimes what they're feeling is normal. So it's okay to share with that child, that if they're feeling sad, that sometimes you feel sad too. That if they feel angry, that anger is a normal human emotion. And sometimes I feel angry too. So that they begin to see that these emotions that they're having are not something to feel embarrassed about or something to keep hidden, but it's okay to talk to you as their friend, as their trusted adult, so that they begin to see that other people have these same emotions that they do too, and it's okay to talk to mom and dad about them.
Yes, it's about normalizing, I suppose, and not having not putting yourself on a pedestal as such, or them.
Yeah.
You're human, and I suppose that's why I called the podcast, Strong, Single, and Human, because it is. We're all human, and we're, as parents, we make mistakes, right? We're not perfect, and we're human.
Yes.
Everyone is
Right.
everyone is a human being. Well, unless there's aliens out there that we haven't actually sort of discovered, but like we're all human beings. We all make mistakes. Yeah,
Yes.
we've just got to be honest about that and learn from our mistakes. Mistakes are our friend.
That's the key,
as it were.
Yeah, that's the key,
because we're supposed to learn from them.
Yes.
So, okay, so what happens if you find out that you do have a child that is depressed, anxious, or is abusing substances? What can you do if you are in that situation? And it's not even so much being in that situation because of the pandemic, but just being in that situation in general.
I think the first thing you want to do is have a discussion with that child. And again, we're coming at it from an inquiring point of view, not from a point of view of accusing the child of using substances or being anxious or being depressed or any other symptom that we may have picked up on. But we want to approach it from an inquiring point of view to see if the child will give us some information as to why they're feeling the way they're feeling or why they're acting the way they're acting. And sometimes that can be a very frustrating thing for a parent, because the child may react by being angry and shut down and not give you very much information, or they may actually share something with you that you didn't know. But regardless of how that conversation goes, if you're a parent and you're concerned that your child is using alcohol or drugs, or that they're feeling depressed or suicidal, or that they're feeling, overwhelmed or anxious or depressed, then I think you need to call on some of the professionals to give you an assessment, to give you a professional assessment, to either rule in or rule out whether or not there is something that needs to be treated. And if so, what's the best approach to getting treatment? So as a parent, you want to get the professionals involved to give you an accurate assessment, a diagnosis if it's appropriate, and a treatment plan if it's needed.
Yeah, I agree. It's it's the best thing to do, really, is to remove, if they're not going to open up to yourself, to actually remove you from that situation and get a third party involved.
Yes.
Because that they may feel that they can open up to that third party because they aren't going to be judged, or they're not going to, sometimes children don't actually divulge information because they feel as though they're going to disappoint you, or,
Yeah.
upset you or whatever. And therefore, they're wanting to protect you as the parent. And therefore it's easier to talk to a
Right.
third party as such. Yeah, no.
And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes a child that might be abusing a substance, alcohol, marijuana, any other drug, in some cases is using it to medicate an underlying mental health issue. And oftentimes we get so wound up at looking at the substance abuse that we forget that there might be an underlying issue that needs to be treated as well. So that's why it's so important that if your child is using a substance, that you get a comprehensive assessment to rule in or rule out if there's any other psychological mental health issues that your child might be struggling with that you didn't know anything about. Maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's depression, could be any number of issues. But as a parent, you want to rule in or rule out if there's any other issues that need to be treated. Now, sometimes this might just be normal, typical adolescent acting out behavior. And if that's true, you need to know that too. You need to have that ruled in or ruled out. But you want to be careful because in some cases, there might be other issues that need treatment as well as, say, the substance abuse.
Yes. And as you were saying that, I was just sitting here thinking, well, sometimes they just don't know. And you as a parent may not have the skills to be able to delve deeper into the reasons, because we've only got a certain set of skills, and we might be very, very good at our day jobs, but actually there's no manual when it comes to bringing up kids, and we're no psychologists or therapists, and therefore, if that's not our forte, and there are obviously other emotional connections that we've had with our children that get in the way. So the kids may not know when you ask them why they're doing what they're doing. I just don't know. And so
that might be an answer. That might be an answer you get.
Yeah.
You may very well get that answer. I don't know. So you're absolutely right. Rely on the professionals to give you the best assessments and the best advice.
Yeah, no, agreed. So you mentioned previously that you've got a blog on your website and things like that. So what other things do you discuss and talk about on your website that might help our parents to get through this?
Well, there's a blog article on what we talked about earlier, the pandemic and how it affected teenage substance abuse. There's an article that briefly gives a little bit more detail than what we talked about. There is this article on teen mental health and has these 10 questions that you can ask children to check in on their mental health. And then besides that, there's information on the website about the book, helptheaddictedchild.com, helptheaddictedchild.com. But there's information on the book, The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. I think there's also a sample chapter. There's a link to order the book. And I would encourage parents to get a copy of the book. It's not going to take you long to read it. You'll get the warning signs. You'll get information on what assessments you should get done if you need to get it done. It'll give you information on what the treatment options are. And it'll give you information about how to recognize what a good treatment program looks like and what questions you should ask a potential treatment provider.
Yeah.
So all of that's on the book's website.
And if people want to ask you a question, can they send you directly a communication as well, a question?
Yes. On the book's website, there is a link where they can contact me directly. They can ask a question, make a comment, and it'll come directly to me.
Awesome. I mean, obviously they can come through me as well, so that's all great. That's awesome. There are many, many different ways to communicate with you, Richard.
That's great.
Exactly. No, that's okay. And look, one final question. I know I asked you last time what superpower you would have, but I'm not going to ask you that again because let's not repeat this. I've got a new one. I have a new question, okay? If you won $10 million tomorrow,
I would spend it on giving a grant or several grants to a school district so that they could implement a new way of educating children to stay away from things like alcohol and drugs. And because what we're doing isn't working, it just isn't working. I would rather see a curriculum that starts in the elementary grades, where we focus on helping kids understand how their brain works and what the brain does and how important it is to protect the brain. I would teach that in elementary school, and I would reinforce it every year in elementary school. And then in middle school and high school, I would start to introduce how drugs work in the brain. So in elementary school, they learn about the brain. In middle school and high school, they learn about what drugs do to the brain. And again, that's something that's reinforced every single year. So we're really turning the drug education into a neuroscience education, because what I've noticed is kids don't pay attention to you telling them drugs are illegal or they're bad for you or they're going to cause you all these problems. They don't believe that. But what they do pay attention to is the science, the neuroscience. So I would use that money to implement a curriculum in a local school district that starts in the elementary grades with teaching kids about the brain, and then in middle school and high school teaches them how drugs work in the brain. I think that can make a difference.
I agree. And because so many, and also they don't know what they're laced with and various different other things like that. So it's, and they really don't want to go down that avenue. And 9 times out of 10, they probably will. But yeah, it's giving them the information. And I know there's a lot of people who would be out there who would say, oh, don't give them the information because then you're just encouraging them. But I think it's, I mean, you've been years and years in this line of work. And so it's coming from people like yourselves. We need to educate people regarding this. I think also we need to enable more a two-way communication, a non-judgmental two-way communication regarding emotions and situations and circumstances that affect kids' mental health. And not, I mean, in my day, a child was seen and not heard, right? And basically, issues that maybe I look at now, being the age I am, and go, oh, for God's sake, that's just nothing to worry about. When you're a teenager, it's a big major thing. It's a major thing in your life. You haven't lived the 50 odd years that I've lived, and therefore you haven't seen and experienced. And when you're going through something, it's full on. It's the most, the number one thing. And although as parents we can say, oh, you'll get through it, it'll be okay, like first loves and things like that, right? End of the world, right? And we know they'll get through it, but it's actually not judging them and actually letting them sit within that emotion and dealing with that. And I think us accepting that although it's a traumatic event for them, and we're trivializing it a little bit, we should actually just sit and listen and accept. Yeah. So hopefully, although I'm not sure it's going to change anytime soon, but hopefully things are gradually changing. We've got a lot more people speaking out about mental health. I was reading today that there's a young man who is gone missing. He's gone missing in New South Wales, and he's been missing for 6 weeks. But his boss, where he works, has set up a Walk It Out charity as such to basically get men to talk, because men don't talk in this country, and I'm sure they don't talk all over the world. So it's about getting men to actually talk and to change the culture that we've had for such a long time, and to say it's okay, it's all right to feel a bit, out of sorts, and to reach out.
That's so very important.
Definitely. Look, thank you, Richard, for coming and joining us, coming back to us again and talking about the research that you've discovered regarding pandemic and teen mental health. It's been interesting. I was very surprised that it had decreased, the substance abuse had decreased, which is a good sign, maybe not, can we do this, but not in a pandemic would be better. But, but hey.
Well, we'll see in a year. We'll see in a year if the decline stabilizes and continues, or if we see an increase because kids getting back to their regular routines. But we'll know. We'll know soon enough.
And we've got the war in Ukraine now kicking off and things like that. So it's like all of those factors that I think. We've just been through a pandemic. We've now got wars kicking off in different parts of the world, which I just find mind-blowing in this day and age. But anyway, I'm not here to solve the political, shenanigans of the world. But I wonder what these things, I wonder what effects these will actually have on our children. Because, I was probably the first generation who'd never been through a war. So, well, actually, no, my parents would have been the first generation that had never been through a war. So I'm like the second, and then we've got Gen X and Gen Y and all of that stuff. And so our kids have never really experienced that. We've always been in safe, secure, economies around the world have sort of been stable, and we've never had to deal with this, not potentially on this scale. So it'll be interesting to see how the world communicates with social media and all of those things, and how hopefully it will influence what's going on in a positive way. But we'll just have to sit here and see, won't we?
Well, that's another issue that we might want to discuss, at some point in the future, and that is social media and how social media has affected adolescents, because the research that's coming out is showing that that social media is having an impact on the image of teenagers, especially girls, and so that's a discussion we might want to have at a future date too, and how social media is affecting teenagers, and what parents can do to help their children with social media, because I think this is going to become more and more of an issue that families are confronting if they're not already doing it now.
I completely agree, and I just my brain explodes that we have teenagers or very young people, early 20s, who have earned millions and millions of dollars off of social media, and are doing just brainless stunts, but attracting so many people to their channels. Mentally, I don't think it's healthy for them. They're not doing anything that actually adds to the world. And what are we teaching our children? Yes, it's, I just don't know. We're getting a lot of people who haven't experienced life, who are influencing millions and millions of other people, and that scares me. And oh dear, we don't want to go in half a dozen other subjects. AI and all of that stuff is just like a frightening situation. I mean, I'm sure the internet was introduced to be a positive thing, but it's morphing into affecting our lives. There's yin and yang with everything, I suppose. But there's actually we need to just be more aware of the yin and encourage the yang, if that's right. I don't know if I've done that right or wrong, but anyway. So look, thanks ever so much for joining us this morning. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
All right, speak to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please hit subscribe wherever you like to hear podcasts. If you'd like to support us further, share this episode with your friends and family on all the usual social media platforms that you're normally on. And finally, drop us a review on iTunes, as I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, and ideas. It all helps me to understand and produce awesome content that I know you're going to want to hear, like this. If you want to check out past episodes, write to us, appear on the podcast, or for links, resources, and show notes, go to our website, www.strongsingleandhuman.com. We are also on all the usual social media platforms, Insta, Facey, and Twitter. Have a wonderful week, and I hope to see you back here again soon. Be kind to yourself, and remember, no one's perfect, and we're all just putting one foot in front of the other and doing our best. I'm Claire Martin, and you've been listening to the Strong, Single, and Human podcast.